guys, thanks for coming to the first Short-Term Shop live of the year. We've got a really cool guest, John Bianchi. It's really hard for me to get that right. I'm really sorry.
You got it. You got it. You nailed it.
It's not my default way of wanting to pronounce your name. Yeah. So guys, John is a data expert. He's gonna have a lot of cool stuff to teach us today about how to read data that you can get really from most any data source, particularly AirDNA, and how to sort through it and really figure out what is good data, what's bad data, how to figure out what the right thing to buy is, and a few other things. So we will just start waiting for the questions to start rolling in.
Yeah, sounds good. Let's also make sure to touch on saturation.
Yes, let's touch on that too. So why don't you just give us a quick intro about yourself while we're waiting on people to sign on.
Okay, cool. So I'll give the usual resume of all my credentials when it comes to this. But so I'm head of data for TechVestor, which is a short-term rental investment fund. We've raised $33 million in the past year, and we're going to end up buying somewhere between 70 and 75 properties by the end of the month. And it's my job to identify which market is the absolute best market for us to go into, but more importantly, what is the absolute best product for us to purchase within that market, and then how to maximize the revenue of those homes. And not to toot my own horn, but I've been doing that pretty successfully for the past 6 months or so. So I'm pretty happy with that. Before that, though, I used to have a Airbnb business. So I had about 15 locations in Chicago. They were managed in arbitrage properties. They were all cash flowing pretty well. Then COVID hit, wiped everything away, and I was able to settle off those contracts to somebody else. And in that time frame, what I learned how to do extremely well was Airbnb data, how to select the properties, how to navigate the data, how to make sense of it. And so I ended up making a free course on YouTube, and that free course turned into an actual business where I now have an Airbnb data consulting business as well, where I help people identify what market to go into, and then once again, how to figure out what is the absolute best thing to purchase in there and how to maximize the revenue of that property. And so as of today, I've got 3 free courses on YouTube, and almost every single last thing that I know is free on YouTube in a course form that you can walk through, and about 13,000 people have gone through it so far. So yeah,
that's awesome.
Yeah, appreciate it.
Yeah, so I guess let's talk about data. So everybody can buy like a subscription to AirDNA and look at what the average revenue, average occupancy, average everything is for a market. So what is the main thing that you look at when you just pull like the AirDNA data, say for like, we'll do 4 bedrooms as an example. What are you looking at? Which of those 3 metrics out of revenue, occupancy rate, and ADR is what you pay most attention to?
Revenue over everything. Right, like ADR I kind of find to be pretty useless, and same with occupancy, because you can have one market that has really low occupancy, but there's still a ton of money being made during those peak seasons. And so I find occupancy to be fairly useless. And on top of that, you can have some homes that are just like really large, great homes that have like a 60% occupancy, and then you have smaller homes that have a 90% occupancy, right? But they're both making the exact same amount at the end of the day. So all I care about is how much is this home actually going to make. So I spend all of my time on the revenue side of things. And the reason I can do that is because I know how to put together a listing really well, I know how to price it really well, and I know how to get my occupancy up if I need to, or at least to the maximum amount that I want. So all I care about is that revenue number. How much is this home going to make over the full year?
I think that's a really good thing to point out. I see a lot of people who will say, okay, well, AirDNA says that I should be able to make this much at this occupancy, but if I can bump the occupancy somehow higher, then I'll make more money. And I think that's really dangerous.
Well, it just doesn't logically make any sense. Like if anyone who's been doing this for a while, they understand that you can't just bump occupancy by a little bit, and you can't just bump your ADR by a little bit. And you know what I mean? It's like, that's
wouldn't it be nice if we could?
Yeah, right. Like that'd be great. Everyone would want to do that, but you can't just do that. So like what I care about is I use the Burger King logic, which is, McDonald's spends millions of dollars to figure out what corner of the street to be on, and Burger King opens up across the street, right? And so Burger King is just replicating what already works. And so what I'm doing is I'm looking at all of the data that exists within the area that I'm looking in, and I'm seeing how well all of these Airbnbs did. And then I'm trying to figure out what they did right. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take everything that they did right, and I'm going to replicate it into my specific listing. And then I'm going to try and add some more things that are going to make it better, right? And so essentially I want to find like 5 listings that are all roughly making 100,000, that all generally look the exact same. And then I'm going to figure out what are all the key metrics and amenities and features that they have, and even the design style, apply it to my listing. And then that by doing that, I feel confident that I'm also going to be able to make $100,000 or roughly within that range, and ideally more. And honestly, that strategy sounds super simple, and there's tons of little nuances of like, well, if you add another property into it, it's going to make them all make less, right? But that tends to not be the case, especially if you study your competition, figure out exactly what they're doing, and put together a better listing. Then you become the first option out of the 5 that you just reviewed, and now you're taking the business actually from all those people, and the guy at the bottom is going to be the one who ends up making a little bit less, right? So it sounds super simple, but it honestly works. And I've been doing it for about 5 years now, and over again, it just produces the results I'm looking for.
So tell me a little bit about where you think the AirDNA data can trip people up. So in terms of like things like properties are in the same bucket that maybe have only been live for like a month as properties that have been live for 5 years. What does that do to the data?
So, I mean, the main thing is understanding what good data is compared to what bad data is, right? Regardless of how long it's been up and running, about 80 to 90% of the data on AirDNA is bad data. Okay, and I'm just going to say that again. 80 to 90% of the data on AirDNA is bad data. And the reason it's bad data is because of the way that AirDNA tracks all of that information. Okay, what they do is they have an algorithm that allows them to go into the calendar of every single Airbnb every single day and record the calendar, and then come back the next day and see if that home got booked or not, right? And then they record that. And if you've ever looked onto an Airbnb calendar, you can't look backwards. So if they start tracking your calendar today, they have to start today, and they have to do that for an entire year before they have a full year's worth of revenue, right? And when you're trying to figure out how much a home is going to make, you need to look at what the annual revenue is and not a portion of the year, right? Because if you just take 12, like the last 30 days, and then you try timing that by 12 to get a full year, you're going to be way off because of seasonality, right? When it comes to Airbnbs, there's crazy seasonality that might be peak season, might be low season. You can't just take that number and times it by 12. That's very like simple way of thinking about it, right? But the reality is that you need AirDNA to be tracking the home for ideally more than 250 days. Ideally over 300. If you can get the home to be tracked for 365 days, that's the best case scenario. And the way that you can see that is when you're on AirDNA, there's a little thing that pops up when you look at one of their dots. It's going to pop up with a little card of information, and on that card it's going to say days available. And really what that should say is days tracked, because that's how long AirDNA has been recording that Airbnb listing and figuring out how much they're actually making during that time frame. Now that's like the first most crucial thing that's needed. And the second thing is you need the home that they're tracking to be a full-time Airbnb listing, like somebody who's actually renting it out full-time. They're not using it only part-time or renting it out for game day, weekends, or whatever it may be. You need them to be a full-time Airbnb host and running it like a business. And if you can find the combination of those two things, a full-time host and AirDNA tracking it for over 250 days, that's where good data comes into play. And the best way to kind of vet that is make sure that there's a review every single month for the past 12 months. And that's how you know that they've been actively renting for that time frame. And then it says over 250 days on AirDNA. And then boom, you know you've got good data. Then you can use that data to figure everything else out. Now you know you're working with like the most accurate potential numbers. And I'm telling you right now, only 10 to 20% of the data on AirDNA is what I just explained. The rest of it is completely useless.
Completely.
Yeah, honestly.
Did you have an example that you wanted to share your screen with today?
I do not. No.
Okay.
I didn't pull anything up. Yeah.
All right, cool.
You want me to?
We've got it on the podcast that comes out in a few weeks. So y'all watch out for that.
Yeah.
So let's talk about also, can you tell if a market is saturated or not if you're just sorting through the AirDNA? Because that's something I see all the time now is people saying, oh, that's saturated. This is saturated. The entire United States is saturated. And that just cannot possibly be the case. So how can we use data to find out if a market's saturated?
Yeah, sure. I can 100% confirm to you that the entire United States is not saturated. I literally went to dozens of markets today. But it's a supply and demand thing, right? So if, let's say hypothetically, okay, what is oversaturation or what is saturation? It's just when there's so many new Airbnb listings that the demand can't keep up with it, and each individual listing starts to make less money, right? And that's when saturation starts happening. And so there's a way to use AirDNA to figure out if a market is oversaturated or starting to be saturated, right? And you just simply look at the supply and you look at the revenue. And so if you're on AirDNA, there's a chart on the overview tab that says rental growth. And it's going to tell you how many new Airbnb listings have come on into that market every single quarter for the past, I think it's like 4 years, right? And you can essentially see how many new listings have shown up, right? So as an example, because I was going through this today, as an example, from Q3 last year to Q3 this year, there was a 60% increase in rentals in Jacksonville. Okay, a 60% increase, which is a crazy amount of new listings. There was over 1,200 new listings in Jacksonville, right? So 60% increase in supply. Then I looked at the revenue increase during that time frame, and there was a 40% increase in revenue. All right. And what this is telling us is that there's 20% more. Like when the supply is 20% higher than the revenue increase, that means that each individual listing made 20% less year over year. Okay. So Jacksonville is an example of a market where each individual listing is roughly making about 20% less this year than they were last year. And so that would be considered a saturated market, right? Now, this is not the case everywhere you go. I can't think of like I know that one so cleanly off the top of my head because I was going through it about a half an hour ago. But there's tons and tons of other markets where if you were to use this exact same process, you would realize that they're not oversaturated. There's actually more money being made per listing in comparison to the year prior, even though there's some markets that are and some markets that aren't. And so you just have to figure that out. Now, this is something that we've talked about a couple of times now, but even if a market is saturated or looking like it's starting to get saturated, that does not mean that it's a bad market to go into, okay? Especially if you know what you're doing, and especially if you're studying your competition, and especially if you're, listening to this Facebook Live or going through all these different things, right? Because a market that's becoming oversaturated is a market in high demand, not only for new Airbnbs, but for a lot of tourism, right? And so me, like personally, I love these type of markets because I like markets with a crazy amount of demand because I know that demand's not going anywhere. And all I really have to do is be one of the best listings in that entire area. And I know how to do that because all I would do is study the competition, figure out all the features and amenities that they have, get a home that can essentially compete with all that, and then put together a better listing, right? Take better photos, do better design, add more features and amenities. And by doing that, you essentially become one of the best listings in that entire market. And so as that market becomes saturated, you're still getting booked because you're at the very top, and you may make a little bit less, but you're going to be still doing extremely well. And I can promise you that's a reality because that's a situation with the fund that I work for right now. So for TechFester, we are seeing that without a doubt right now. I'm watching in some of the markets that we're in, these homes that are starting to make like $10,000, $20,000 less than they were, 6 months ago. But our homes have not seen any bit dip. If anything, we're starting to see them go up a little bit, right? And it's because we're implementing this strategy so strictly. So anyways, that's oversaturation. That's my long little spiel on that. I hope that made sense.
Yeah. So you actually prefer and run towards what people would consider saturated markets rather than run away from them because the fact that they're saturated means there's enough tourism demand that's probably never going to go anywhere.
Exactly. And the thing is when there's a lot of tourism demand, people pay a lot more for the listings. So each individual listing is going to make a ton more in comparison to a place that doesn't have a lot of demand, right? So, and that's really where you get the cash flow returns and the nice cash on cash is when you have places like a 4-bedroom that can make almost $200,000 a year, right? And when you can find a place that has so much demand that people are willing to pay that amount of money over the entire year, you'll be able to cash flow if you buy it at the right price, right? Whereas if you go to a place that maybe just, let's say Cincinnati, that is not nearly as much in demand, right? And you get a 4-bedroom there, people aren't going to be paying hand over fist just to stay in those locations where like they would in some of the other spots that I know of, right? So I prefer to just go to these places where people are just dying to get there and just giving them the best possible listing that they could have. And then that way I know that I'm going to be beating everybody else, right? And it works. So that's that's the best part about it, is that it's working.
Oh, that's great advice, because all I ever see is people like yelling at each other on the internet and running screaming away from markets that have a lot. And guys, too, markets that have a lot of listings does not necessarily mean that it's saturated. Just because there are a lot of them doesn't mean that that market can't support that.
Yeah, a good example of that is Nashville. So I've actually made multiple videos on this. Nashville's a market that has like 8 or 9,000 listings, and the reason I chose Nashville specifically is because I saw people on the internet complaining about how Nashville was oversaturated, and so I just ran the test on it. And I think each individual listing in Nashville is making somewhere between 10 and 20% more, even though there's like 20 to 30% more listings in Nashville year over year, right? So yeah, there's 8,000 listings, but there's so much demand in Nashville that everybody is making more money this year than they were last year, right? And so who cares that there's 8 or 9,000? Just be really good as well on top of that. I think the people who shy away from it are the ones who just like have a scarcity mindset, right? They can't comprehend that 8,000 listings would be booked out, you know what I mean, during over the entire time frame. And it's like, well, there's a lot of people who are coming here. Like, how many tourists are there, right? Because there's millions of people going to those places.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well, that's really interesting, because I've never heard somebody frame it like that before. Do you have any like favorite markets currently?
I do. I can't say though. So what I can say is that I do have some favorite markets. And you know, with TechFester, like these are some of the markets that we're investing into. There's some of the markets that we find a lot of the opportunity in. I can't like publicly talk about that stuff, but you know, if you want to reach out to TechFester, you can talk to people at on our team, and they can, you know, kind of point you in the right direction. But I can't say it here, unfortunately.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there any markets? We've got a question in the chat that says, do you have any next best favorite markets that you like that TechFester is not looking in, that you can say?
we're looking into a lot of markets, unfortunately. One thing I will say, like, and this is going to be like a sort of a broad statement, but it's kind of one of my favorite things that I'm seeing right now, and that is the combination of a place that has a lot of tourism demand, but has a lot of traditional real estate. Okay, so you have like a place where it's not just a vacation rental place, which is, vacation rental destinations are always going to be the best of the best, cream of the crop. Like that's just how it is, right? One thing that I'm liking and trying to find more of is these sort of in-betweens, where you have it where it's a lot of traditional real estate. So you have a lot of like families that live there, and they own these homes, kind of like a suburb sort of feel. And then, but on top of that, there's something that's not too far away from that location that is a tourism travel sort of spot, right? Or demand, or beach, or whatever it may be. And it's within driving distance. And so you get this sort of like suburb mixed with a tourism spot. And that's where you're going to get a lot of demand for a home that would not traditionally be a vacation rental, right? And so that's kind of the combination I like to find the most. But they're difficult to find. So I'm just going to give you that general logic, right? And then you can go hunting from there.
Gotcha. Okay, that makes sense. That did spark a few ideas in my brain of areas that fit that bill. So I'm sure everybody else did too. Yeah. Let's see. In terms, we have a question in the chat. How do you find outperformers in a lesser traveled area of a market, which might be 30 to 60 minutes from the normal hot zone in a major vacation market? So an example would be like in the Smokies market, Cosby or Walland or Dandridge type areas. So how do you find those outperformers in those areas that are like a little less traveled?
Okay. So I'm going to start by saying that I don't typically look into those areas at all. Just because like something that's 30, 60 minutes away is not necessarily in the same realm, right? Of the other hotspots. So the way that I want to answer this is I would look into that market the exact same way that I'd look into any other market. Okay. So I have these reports, and I use these reports to gather all the data for an area. And then what I do with this data is I organize it from all the different neighborhoods, right? So all the different zip codes. And then I also organize it from all the different unit sizes. And so what I'm trying to figure out is how well does a 4-bedroom do in this neighborhood compared to another neighborhood within the same city? And I'm trying to figure out which neighborhood produces the most money for a 4-bedroom or a 5-bedroom or a 3-bedroom, right? And then from there, what I'll do is I'll then look really deep into that specific area, that for the 4 bedrooms within that specific zip code. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to analyze every single one of those homes in order of which one's doing the best to which one's doing the worst. And I'm going to go through each one of them, and I'm going to figure out what is allowing the people at the very top to make the amount of money that they're making. What does their listing look like? What amenities do they have? And I will write out every single feature and amenity that I see. If I see that there's 2 living rooms, I'm going to mark that down. If I see that one living room has a pool table, I'm going to mark that down. If I see that it has a pool table with a bar setup and it's got a TV and it's got a bunch of decor and it looks like a really cool, fun place to be, I'm going to mark that down, right? If I'm going to mark down that it has a deck, but the deck is actually like 3 times larger than a regular deck, I'm going to mark that down, right? Does it have hanging lights? Does it have a hot tub? Does a hot tub just, is it like a wood barrel hot tub, or is it a regular hot tub? Is there sort of a setup around the hot tub? I'm going to mark all these things down, right? I'm going to sort of continue to do this over and over and over again for each one of those different listings. And what I'll end up doing is I'll figure out what the common amenities and features are that are allowing the people at the very top to make the amount of money that they're actually making. And then I'm going to look for a home that has the similar bone structure. Okay. So such as like 2 living rooms and a basement or something like that, similar bone structure. I'm going to try and find something like that, which I will then be able to add in all of those amenities and features and design and decor into. And now I've got a like for like property that is probably going to be a little bit better. And then I'm going to know that I'll be able to beat that home that's making $200,000 a year. Right. And that's how I would go about figuring out how to find a home in a market that's 30 to 60 minutes away from a main market, of how to win in that market. It's, to be honest, it's the exact same strategy you use for any market, regardless. You're just overanalyzing to like the nittiest grittiest detail to get to that point, right? Can I go on a little more of a tangent on this?
Yes, please do.
Keep going. Okay, so and when you're doing this, okay, what ends up happening is you end up figuring out sort of a couple of different things. The one thing is that you're actually figuring out what style and design matters the most in that area. Okay, so and what the reason the style and the design matters is because the people at the top are all designing their homes for a specific customer, for a very specific archetype, right? Customer archetype, the person that's going to be paying the most and has money to be able to afford a $10,000 weekend, right? Like that person that has the money to be able to do that is expecting a specific type of design. And if you're not providing that specific design and decor and feel and everything, you're also going to be missing out. But you can figure out what that design and decor should be based off of all the other homes that are currently doing that, right? And a really good example of this is there's a certain market that we're in where we have to buy a very specific type of sunbathing chair, because the top 3 listings in that area all have the exact same sunbathing chair. They probably didn't do it on purpose. They're all 3 completely different hosts, but for some reason, all 3 of those hosts have the exact same type of chair. And it's a little bit of a more higher end lounge chair, but it also is very on brand, and it's also in style right now. And so because of that, we're actually removing all of our sunbathing chairs from that area, and we're replacing them all with that specific one. So now we are also having the exact same thing that all these other people have, which they're willing to pay the most for, right? Like that's a very, very minute detail, but it'll make a huge difference in our revenue, and it's a very small investment, right? So like that's one thing that you find out, which I think is pretty cool. And I can go on some other stuff too, but maybe I'll save it for a little later.
Yeah, I mean, that kind of makes my head spin a little bit to go into that much detail. and in our company chat, one of our agents said, wow, this dude can out spreadsheet me.
I doubt it, but maybe I'll look at listings. So
hey, no, that's awesome. It's a good skill to have.
Yeah.
All right, so we have a couple more questions in the chat. Where did Brooklyn's question go? Okay, she said, what's the difference between like AirDNA and Rabu data? Because, AirDNA, you have to pay a bunch of money. Rabu's free. We also use STR Insights, or I do. I was actually on that this morning, but that serves a little bit of a different purpose than this specifically. So we'll just say, compare AirDNA versus Rabu.
Okay. So kind of a loaded question. I'm going to try and answer it as simply as I possibly can.
All right.
All 3 of those that you just mentioned have completely different use cases. So Rabu is very similar to Rentalizer on AirDNA, and I don't like using either of those. I think that you should never, ever, ever use Rabu or Rentalizer to make a purchase for a property. And the reason being is because when you input that address and you say how many bedrooms and bathrooms it has, it's going to give you a prediction of how much that home is going to make. And I cannot tell you how often that I personally come up with a completely different number. And the reason could simply be because the home I'm looking at only has one living room and a small deck compared to what the average that they're providing me is based off of all of the properties and not the very specific property that I'm looking at. And so in some case, and I've done this test on it before where I've taken like, I think it was about 30 properties that I had analyzed and came up with like what I believed it was actually going to make. And then I ran all of them through AirDNA. AirDNA's rentalizer tool, which is the exact same as Rabu. And I ran them all through there, and every single one of them, or sorry, 30% was way off. Like they predicted it was going to make way more than I thought. 30% was way below, and 30% was dead on, right? So I guess what you could say is those tools are going to be accurate about 30% of the time. However, it's unlikely that they're going to be, I would never purchase a property based off of just that, okay? So what I'm telling you right now is that if you're going to buy a property and you're using just Rabu, stop being cheap, buy AirDNA. It's $100 for a subscription for 1 month. Pay that. It's worth it, because what you can then do is you can extract the data for whatever home that you're specifically looking at. So if you're looking at a 4-bedroom within Nashville and within a specific area, you pay $100 for the Nashville subscription. You go onto that map, you pull out all of the data for those 4 bedrooms, and then you study and analyze them to figure out which one your home best falls within. And then from there, you then know if your home's going to make 150 or 100,000. And I can't stress that enough, that that's exactly what you need to do when you're actually doing this analysis. So that's okay. Sorry. So I just need to go on a really long rant there about Rabu and Rentalizer, because those tools are they like hurt my soul, because I know so many people who have bought properties based off of them, and it's just like not worked out.
Yeah, I don't know that much about Rabu, but I've told a lot of people to not mess with the Rentalizer because it just gives wildly different numbers. Sometimes good, sometimes bad. Like sometimes it underpredicts and sometimes it overpredicts. Yeah. And but I've noticed that for several years when I've gone to use the Rentalizer for properties that I own and gotten really, really different numbers. And it's supposed to be measuring my properties exactly, and it's just not. So
it's just not. Yeah. So it's a dangerous tool to use, and it's honestly, it's very irresponsible of them to even have those tools out there and to be providing them to people saying like, hey, use this and go buy a property based off of it. Like, it's super irresponsible as the owners of those companies. Now, I honestly probably shouldn't be saying that, but the reality is it's true, and I believe that through and through. But anyway, so like those are those 2 tools. Do you want me I'll continue to go through the other ones to give like how to use if you want me to.
Sure. Yeah, please do.
Yeah. Okay.
I think everybody just wants to hear more.
All right. So Rabu and Rentalizer, those, I've covered those 2. Now AirDNA, their Market Minder tool, obviously has a lot of other features in there, and you can use AirDNA for a lot of different things. Like I truly use AirDNA almost every single day. It's still a super useful tool. You can figure out the supply and demand, which is going to allow you to know if the property is going to be oversaturated or not. It's going to allow you to like kind of bounce, like their free version will allow you to go through a lot of different markets and kind of see which one has either more demand or is averaging a higher revenue in comparison to another market. You can just see that from the revenue, monthly revenue average at the top right corner. And so, when you're using AirDNA, you can get a better idea of if you should spend more time looking into a market. How do I explain this? So most people are trying to identify what market to go into, right? Or what next market to go into. And so you can use AirDNA to help narrow down that search by trying to see which area has more demand or is making more money on average, just from its free tool, right? But then what you're trying to do here is you're trying to create a short list. So if you may have like 30 different places that you're considering, you want to get that down to about 3, right? And then when you've got it down to 3, that's when you can start to like deep dive a market and truly figure out what's actually driving revenue in that area. And so that's what you would use AirDNA to be able to do, is to essentially narrow down which market to go into, and then kind of dive a little deeper into that specific market to figure out what is the best thing to purchase within that market, right? Now, with that being said, STR Insights technically does the exact same thing. So STR Insights is going to allow you to look. They're essentially going to give you markets that you could potentially be going into, right? Based off of how much money you're willing to spend and what different type of market that you actually want to be in. They're going to give you some markets that they recommend that could potentially work out. Now, I've used STR Insights when it first came out. I don't use it anymore. I'm not saying to not use it. I think it's a great way to pop in your information and try and pull out some markets that might work for your budget, right? Other than that, I can't really speak too much on it.
Yeah, I mean, I think STR Insights is a little bit different. It serves a different purpose than the other one. So I use STR Insights to like figure out what market I might want to invest in next, or like outside of actual investing. So lately I've been looking at buying something in Wyoming specifically, perhaps Montana, but probably Wyoming. That would be more of like just for our family. Like it's not an investment, something we could go use. But at the same time, I do want it to be able to put a dent in its own expenses when we're not using it. I'm not at the point where I can be okay with something just sitting there and not making money when we're not there. And I've been using STR Insights a lot to kind of figure out like, okay, well, where might this make sense? Because there's a bunch of different cool areas in Wyoming that we like, or Montana or Colorado. We're doing Colorado on our motorhome trip this year. So kind of trying to figure out like, okay, well, there's this really pretty house that I like that would totally work for us, but let's go over here to like STR Insights and kind of look at, does this area make sense? Or there's another one over here on this side of the state. So I think it's a little bit different tool. And then if I want to like really drill down like what you're talking about, then I'll go into AirDNA.
AirDNA.
Yeah.
So that's exactly how those two tools should be used. And can I mention my tool, my report?
Oh yeah.
A little bit about it, right? Please. So like the idea is like you'd use STR Insights, and let's say it pops up with like a location that you want to look into, right? Then you use AirDNA to kind of figure out, maybe you've used STR Insights, it's giving you a list of like 5 different places you want to consider. Then you use AirDNA to figure out which of those 5 you're the most interested in based off of just like high level averages and things like that, right? Then I create these reports, which would allow you to have all the data extracted into a report, which is then organized into, where's the most money being made across this entire city, location, whatever it may be. And then the process, and then you're able to go into each of the data points and the listings and the links, and you're able to figure out exactly what the main revenue drivers are by following a process. And so by getting the report on that specific location, you're able to know exactly what is the best thing to purchase within that area and how to drive the most revenue, which is exactly what I do every single day, right, for TechVestor. And I use the exact same reports to be able to deep dive further into it, because AirDNA will allow you to deep dive only to a certain point, whereas these reports will allow you to go even further. So just wanted to kind of point that out. It's a process that you have to go through with all these different tools to then get to that end result, right? And I just want to make sure that people understand that I do have something that can help with that process.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
And are you taking calls on that now or no?
No. So yeah, we talked about this before. So yeah, so I'm not taking calls on that anymore. I'm pretty well exclusive with TechVestor, just 100% working with them and doing everything for them. However, 2 nights ago, what I did was I created something that would replace myself. Okay, so I used to take phone calls, and every single time I got on a phone call, somebody was like, I don't know what market to go into. I'm trying to figure out what market to go into. Can you help me do that? Right. And so what I decided to do is I can't take calls anymore, but I still want to be able to help people pick what market to go into. Right. And so on my main website, there's a free training of exactly how I would coach people on how to choose what market to go into. The exact same advice, because it was the same thing I was repeating over and over and over again. And this is actually the exact same advice that I gave at Rachel Gainsbourg's conference that she had. Mm-hmm. This is almost the exact same presentation. I just relayed it out and put it into a free training. And so now there's a option on my website where it's like, watch the free training. And it's about a half an hour of me just deep diving how to pick the best market for you. And so I don't take calls anymore, but you have more training and free stuff from me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
We do have some questions stacking up in the chat, so I'll go ahead and ask those. So Julie says, how do you know if revenue data contains taxes and cleaning fees?
Taxes? Okay, so it does not include tax. No.
Yeah, no, you want to know if it includes taxes and cleaning fees in it. When, like, if it's giving you a revenue number, how do you know what's included?
Okay, so I can speak about AirDNA's data, no one else's data, right? So, and my data as well. So like the the number that you're looking at is the average daily rate plus the cleaning fee. That's it. So, and the reason being is because AirDNA can only see that information when they're extracting the data from Airbnb. So they actually don't know how much people are paying in taxes or how much you're paying in taxes. Just like they don't know what the service fee is either, right? So when you see on AirDNA that a property made 100,000, that's the nightly rate and the cleaning fee total over that entire time period, right? And you can look that up in the glossary terms of AirDNA. They explain what all the different definitions mean. And so that's what that one means there. And a big mistake that I see people making all the time is they consider the cleaning fee to be a wash. So they think that $100,000 doesn't include the cleaning fee. And so then they don't include cleaning expenses in their expense sheet because they think like, oh, I'm going to add a cleaning fee and it's going to be a wash, but that's not the case. So if you see 100,000, you got to minus, about 15-20% out of that.
Good to know. Good to know. Oh, somebody says, what is your website so they can go find that tool?
So it's not a clean website, like a URL. It's not very easy. What I recommend is typing in my name on YouTube. So John Bianchi, and put that into YouTube, or the Airbnb data guy. You can put that into YouTube. And you're going to see my videos, and underneath all of my videos, I have all the different links to my resources and things you can reach out to. So, and in that there's a profit map link, which is the reports that I offer. It's a profit map. So you can click on that and that will bring you to the free training site that I was referring to.
Awesome.
You can also just look up my name on any social media as the Airbnb data guy, and there'll be a link in my link tree to the free training.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we've got time for one more question. This is a pretty good one for being the last question. Being that you look at so much data, what are some of the observations that you have made recently that have surprised you? So anything you have been surprised to see looking at so much data all the time?
Okay, good question. That's a great question. I'm trying to think of what's genuinely shocked me. I think okay, so it's not a super recent one, but it's something that I've noticed over time, and it just like keeps being reaffirmed, is how the smallest additional features on a home can make a world of a difference. So as an example, we have trying to not give away too much information here, but we have two places that are not too far away from each other, okay? And they're both the exact same size bedroom count. They're in the same city, right? The only difference is the yard. That's it, right? The only difference is literally the yard. And because of that yard, the home's making about $60,000 to $70,000 more than the other one, right? Which is is insane amount of additional money to make because of a yard that's a little bit bigger. And it's not even a fully utilized yard either. It's just bigger. And it's not, and like I can't stress enough how similar these homes are to each other. I've ran tests on this with like multiple people where I'm like, I just showed them the inside of the house. I'm like, hey, which one of these inside of the homes do you think is better? And like, I always kind of get mixed reviews where they'll go the left one or the right one or whatever it may be. And then I show them the backyard, and then they're like, they then realize like, oh, okay, that makes more sense why that one would make so much more, right? So that's one thing that's like been super surprising. Another one is design. This is something that I've been just stressing and talking about on like all my TikToks and Instagrams and everything. But I've come across a lot of these listings that they just design a home way better and more for the ideal customer. Like it's extremely designed for a specific customer, and it's over the top, and they've really put a lot into it and thought into it. And the home will make $80,000 more than another home that's literally right down the street that has the exact same bones to it, like the exact same size backyard, the exact same interior. It's the exact same bedroom count. Everything's the exact same, but this one just designed it so well, so strategically, that it's making $80,000 more. And I can't like that one. I would say that one's probably the one I like the most because I've seen that one over and over and over again now. And I've like pointed out different designers who are putting their homes together extremely well. And so in other words, you can literally design a home that will create an experience for the person, right? Really like a true experience where they feel like they're walking into something that's specifically designed for them and what they're planning on doing. And they're willingly paying way more than the home that's right down the street that just gives them the beds and the things. I'm not talking about like a poorly designed home, right? The one that's making $80,000 less. It wasn't a poorly designed home in any way. It was still a good listing. it still had like murals and hanging lights and all those sort of things. And then the other one just down the street was just significantly better. So yeah, like pretty incredible. Design goes a really long way. I think we're entering into the next era of Airbnb, where it's just going to keep getting more competitive, more strategic, more aligned with experience rather than just providing a place. And so I think that's the angle to kind of go at as best you possibly can.
Awesome. That's really good advice. And I think I know what market you're talking about. But yeah. So a lot of really, really great advice here. Guys, John's going to be on an episode of the Short Term Show podcast coming up here, I think in a few weeks. So stay tuned for that. And John, do you have anything you want to say before we go? Any words of wisdom? You already told us how we can find you.
Just the easiest way to win in the Airbnb game is to study your competition, figure out exactly what they're doing, and put together a listing that's better than them, and you'll get booked before them. And that's just how you win. And it's as easy as that.
Awesome. All right, guys. Well, thanks so much for coming on, John, and we will catch you later. See you on the show.